Hello and welcome to the Makers in American Spaces webinar series. This is a professional development series meant to assist you in expanding your program offerings in your American corners, binational centers, information resource centers, and other spaces. As part of this series, we recruit experts in cutting-edge maker technologies from the United States to help familiarize you with the maker movement and how it is transforming libraries, schools, universities, into active collaborative learning laboratories. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Magia Krause. I'm an information resource officer based in Moscow. I'm here at the Moscow American Center with my colleagues, and I'd like to say a few words about the webinar before I introduce our speakers today. First of all, please use the Q&A feature in Google Hangout to let us know where you're joining us from and to pose your questions and comments for the presenters. We'll try to address as many of your questions as we have time for today, and we also encourage you to join our Google Plus community, Makers in American Spaces, so that we can continue the conversation further and that you can find new resources about maker programs to inspire you in your American spaces. This is our third webinar in the series. Back in December, we discussed the basics of maker spaces with Kylie Peppler, who's joining us again today, and also with Ben LeDuc-Mills from Spark Fun. And during our second webinar last month, we talked about hackathons and how we can recruit students and other community members to help organize mini hackathons in our American spaces. And that was with Kylie Peppler, Gabriella Richard, and John Schimmel. And both of these webinars are archived and available on the Moscow IRC YouTube page, and you can find them in the Google Plus community. So today, I'm pleased to once again welcome our special guest, Kylie Peppler, who will help me moderate this webinar focused on creative interactive learning spaces in libraries with littleBits. And I'd like to say a few words about each of our speakers before we jump right into our webinar. Kylie, as you may remember, is an assistant professor of learning sciences at Indiana University, and she's director of the creativity labs there. She also leads the MacArthur Foundation's Make to Learn initiative, and her research focuses on the intersection of arts, media, and new technologies. And she visited us in Russia and Belarus back in September on a speakers program and provide us with hands-on training, and so she really understands how American spaces work and what our needs are. Brian Pichman is joining us as the Director of Strategic Innovation at the Evolve Project. He speaks a lot about innovative technology as a presenter, loves collaborating with both libraries and companies. He's dedicated to bringing libraries into the future using cost-effective measures and strategies. And much of Evolve's work includes bridging the digital divide, breaking away from traditional library views, becoming trendsetters, and finding or building innovative works geared towards interaction and collaboration. And he's also been working with startup companies across the country, promoting libraries and encouraging people to work closer with libraries and developing new ideas and concepts. And it's also a pleasure to introduce Allison Vannatta, who is an Education Accounts Manager at littleBits. Allison has a master's degree in elementary education, has worked in a number of educational settings in the past, including kindergarten, 5th grade, and summer camp settings. She's been with littleBits for about a year and a half and was part of the support department for the first year, helping educators from all over the globe implement littleBits into their programs. And if littleBits is new to you, which it was for us just a few months ago, it's a great way to learn about electronics, to build circuits using pre-engineered modules that anyone can use, even young children. We've had a lot of fun using littleBits in our programs here at the American Center, so this will be a great introduction to you for all of the educational resources that littleBits provides. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kylie. I'm going to thank you all for joining us for this webinar, and we'll get started. Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Magia. It's a real treat this week. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers, but we're going to cover specifically how to kind of start to design your library spaces. And so you're going to hear a lot of small tips and tidbits about how to, how to rethink your space on a very low cost budget. You're going to think about, how you can use littleBits to actually start to engage your patrons and thinking about creating new technologies and start to build their own stories through this work. It's been a real, kind of fun trajectory for us. Here at the Creativity Labs, we do a lot of work around studying what these new technologies actually mean in the learning process. And so we've been comparing littleBits to a lot of other counterparts of other things that you could purchase on the market. And I can definitely say that this is the easiest tool for you to get started with. It's the most playful, but it's also, you're going to hear about the way in which the company has expanded to have lots and lots of different kinds of electronic pieces, ranging from acoustic pieces to simple switches and circuits and light sensors and all sorts of things. So it's all the little pieces that you're going to be needing to kind of invent and create your new electronics. And so it's a wonderful suite of things that you can integrate into crafts and get people of all ages involved. So we're going to go through that today. We're going to Brian is going to introduce you to some of the stuff that he's been doing to actually convert some of the library spaces into cutting-edge 21st century learning spaces. So that's really exciting. And so I'm going to just introduce our speakers just here for a moment. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about how you first got involved in working with libraries?
Sure. So I actually started working in a library when I was 16 as a page. It was one of those jobs that were open for me, and I was like, yep, I need money. I'll go work at the local library. And I didn't think much of it at the time until I was about 18 when I was asked if I could be in charge of the IT. And still at the same time, I was like, all right, I'm a computer guy. I'm not a library guy. I don't see the correlation whatsoever. So then I went to this conference called Internet Librarian, and out of that conference, I was introduced to what libraries can do and what they're capable of, and that's when like the little switch went off, and it's like, wow, I didn't know you can do everything like making things in your library space or building things in your library space. So then when I got back home to the library, I was like, I have 1,001 ideas, and here's like 14 really cool companies that have really cool tech products. Can we get them in our library? And the director at the time was very open to it, and she was like, yeah, sure, put a plan together and let's get to work. And so that's essentially how it happened.
Great. And how did you come across littleBits in your work?
I think I follow a lot of the new startups, and I think I was either introduced to littleBits or I just kind of was searching for circuits, and I saw littleBits show up. And then ever since then, it was like, littleBits are awesome.
Allison, can you say a few words to introduce littleBits to our audience?
Sure. So I'll go into this a little bit more later, but essentially littleBits is a library of electronic modules. They snap together with magnets. They're color-coded, so they're really easy to understand, and they're magnetic, so you really can't do it wrong. There's no wrong way to connect them because the magnets simply won't let you do that. So they all have unique functions. You have your, as Kylie mentioned, you have your sensors and your switches, your motors, your lights, your sounds, but you also have more specialty kits. So we have one's dedicated to space science or one's dedicated to music and sound. But they all, the beauty of the library is that they're all designed to work together. So no matter where you start, you can only build from there. And like I said, I'll go into it a little bit more deeply later. But that's kind of a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, exactly. For us, we think a lot about learning and how littleBits supports the learning process. So the small move of just instead of having snaps but having magnets there seems to really help kids to understand polarity in the circuit, for example, and to really kind of think about how things are ordered. And there's a really low threshold, so if you don't get it right the first time, you can just kind of break it apart and try something new to innovate. Are there any other things that you'd like to tell the audience a little bit about how littleBits can encourage both learning but also creativity?
Sure. So littleBits it lowers, as we mentioned, the barrier of entry. We live in a highly technological world, and a lot of us maybe are not as technologically literate as maybe an electrical engineer or somebody like that. We spend a lot of time with electronics, but we don't necessarily see that next layer underneath. So littleBits really helps to kind of expose the inner workings in a really modular and easy way so that we can better understand not only the gadgets that we work with every day, but also instead of having to solder or wire or program in order to use electronics, you can very easily create and learn and, as you mentioned, integrate with craft materials in a very simple and intuitive way that's also very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to see lots of great examples too about how this is being integrated into all sorts of different, just a Ferris wheel that a child can create, a musical instrument that could be uniquely their own, and all sorts of different projects that can be taken in a lot of different directions and combined with the stuff you're doing with your 3D printer or your laser cutter, or even just simple like popsicle sticks and paper and so forth. I think it's also really exciting about littleBits in terms of it gets us to really think about how the maker movement's potential for innovation and entrepreneurship. A part of it is imagining new futures, new technologies that might not be out there. Several of the kids that we work with, some are deaf and hearing impaired, for example, and they're actually using littleBits to create new devices for their homes to make them more adaptable for people with special needs, and so that they can, something that reacts to sound if somebody's entering the room and so forth. And so it's about envisioning new possibilities and new futures and emulating the kinds of electronics that we see in our everyday devices, but also kind of expanding that and creating something new. Brian, we're gonna have you start us off and kick us off in your presentation and walk us through some of the general design moves that you've been assisting in the library spaces.
Sure. Let me pull this slide up. All right, everyone able to see? All right, so I wanted, before I start talking about kind of libraries and makerspaces and kind of why you should be doing it, here's the evidence that you need to use if you're starting to build your own space and you want to kind of prove the necessity of it. So there was a survey done in the U.S. Where they polled all these different people and they asked simple questions like, have you used a library in the last 12 months? 53% of those people responded, yes, I have. Then they asked, how important is your library to the community? 91% said it is important. So the question becomes, what happened to that missing 38%? How can a library bring in those 38% of those missing people? Because technically, we should have 91% of those people going into the library in the last 12 months. So then they asked some follow-up questions. What should a library offer to improve it? So they asked, should it have interactive learning experiences similar to museums? 47% said definitely do it. And then help people digitize the material and historical documents. And again, more things that a library could be doing to bring people in. So how can we get to that full 91% of those people? So I always tell people to always take risks. That's essentially what I did when I redesigned the library I used to work at, where we just tried different things and see what happened. We would call it a pilot program or a beta test. So we would buy a couple kits, try it out, and if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. And part of that also is that we all have creative potential. So when we were putting our space together, we wanted to make sure that we provided the capability to allow everyone to be creative in some fashion or another, whether it be just playing video games and learning about how games work, or building circuits and things like that. Everyone has creative potential. So the reason for building a new library space is to build a public value. Start being more about just books, providing stories or creating stories versus providing stories. And utilizing something like a makerspace to do that. So there's a few key pieces when you're thinking of redesigning your library. First of which is to offer the ability to create and invent. littleBits is a great plugin for this, where it allows you to create and allows you to invent. And this is a very simple board, low key, low cost. It's like a cork board. There's little holes everywhere, and you pick up colored golf tees and you can make signs. Very similar to like a light bright, but without the light. When you design your library space, you want to make sure you allow your patrons to discover things, and whether that be through the use of technology or something simple like how the books are displayed. They say children judge a book by its cover, so if you allow your books to be judged by their cover, you'll have a higher rate of circulation. Collaboration. You want to leave your library space the ability to collaborate. You want people to come together that might not know each other and work together. And I got a really good story for later about how collaboration can take place in the library, and where people that aren't necessarily friends can become friends. Interaction. You want your library space to allow interaction with the patrons on the space and the staff and the patrons. So you want to make sure that in your space you can constantly interact with others. And last, you want to have your library space to be innovative. You want something innovative, trendy, or cool. These are actually a product called Sound Egg. They're musical chairs that you can sit in and listen to music. And it's pretty soundproof, or it reduces the rate of sound, rather. So the concept that I had when I built or started redesigning the library was, if you build it, they will come. Kind of a scene from A Field of Dreams. So as we started redesigning our library, we had a tarp up, and we hid what we were working on from the children's section of the library. But they would end up ripping holes into the tarp. It was like a paper tarp. And then all of a sudden you just heard the kids, "Oh, wow, it's so much bigger now." And it really wasn't. We just used bright colors, and I'll get into kind of the key things that you should consider when looking at redesigning your space in a second. But then the kids were asking, "Hey, do we have to get a ticket to get in line to come to the library? Like, should we get here the night before?" As if it was, some big entrance event. And that really wasn't the case. We're like, "No, you can just come right on in when we're all done." But the idea that the children had, that it was so much better and so great, they had to get in line for it, was a really good feeling. So here's an example of a layout of the library that was redesigned by allowing more collaborative spaces in the back, where the windows are, letting people come together and work and play. In the library that I helped redesign, we added fun, bright colors around the area, and we also put all the books in the back of the library. And the reason for that was there's a phrase that you put the milk in the back of the grocery aisle, so people are forced to go through the entire grocery store to get the milk. When we were putting it together, we thought about putting the tech in the back, so people are forced to go through the circulation and check out books as they get to the tech. But our problem wasn't people coming. Our problem wasn't people. We didn't have anyone coming to get the milk or the books, if you will. So we wanted to put our technology and all the cool bells and whistles up in the front, and then utilize the library staff to bring the patrons into the circulation. So we wanted to draw them in, and that's how we did it. And here's like a view if you were standing. So some of the key components of a redesign. With your furniture, you want to have fun, bright colors, and make it lightweight so it's easy to move. I don't know why it ever happened, but back in the day, people used to make humongous circulation desks and then bolt those huge circulation desks into the floor. There really isn't a need for that. No one will be stealing your circulation desk anytime soon. So I encourage you to make smaller desks that are more modular and easier to move. By that, put things on wheels. Don't need to fasten things to the floor. And if you wanted to, adding more outlets in the future, use a raised flooring. Raised flooring will add an extra inch or two to your floor, but then you can run cords and conduit and network cables into the floor without having to drop pipes or anything like that from the ceiling. And then a few pieces about the collection. What we did is we did a rotating collection, so it always provided a new environment. So when people came in, they wouldn't see the first 7 books on the shelf. They'll see a different set of books. And so to them, they'll be forced to browse and kind of look and see what else is new. We also use props to show the collection, not books. For instance, the Clifford book section, we didn't have the Clifford book on top of the shelf showing the kids where the Clifford was. We got the Clifford stuffed animal and had it there. And then also do something like an interactive bookend. We mounted tablets to the end of our shelves so kids can, right from the shelf, check in and out books, search for books, browse the card catalog. They were able to do all that through an inexpensive tablet. And then from a workflow perspective, we utilize self-checkout units, especially the children. They really like doing things on their own, so they actually checked out more books because they were doing it themselves. They wanted to go to the library so they could be like mom and dad and put things into a shopping cart and then check them out. And they loved it. And then so we're increasing our circulation, and they're going to go home and read those books. We also did a mobile checkout. So we had an app created so you can use your iPad or iPhone or any other type of phone or tablet to check in and out books. We also used a standing help desk. So we wanted our staff to be more engaged with patrons. In order to do that, we didn't want them sitting down. We had them standing. So when they're more approachable. They say that when a child approaches an adult and they see them sitting working on a computer or even looking at the computer, they're less inclined to ask questions. So if they're standing, children will be more comfortable asking the question. We also moved the head of the department into the main areas so they can be accessible and the children can interact and collaborate with them. And here is the finished view of the children's library in Mokina. We have 2 smart boards on the left and right there that kids can come in and play and collaborate. We also had gaming stations and a whole bunch of little maker kits like littleBits and things like that. So some successes out of that. We bought this product called Sphero. It's a robotic ball that you can move around with your smartphone. And what we did was we would actually bring it to schools and show people how cool the library is. It's much harder to sell something when you don't have anything tangible to show with it. By that, when an adult walks into because we did outreach at the public schools, so when the librarian went to the public school, essentially they were interrupting that student's day in some fashion or another, whether it be lunch or a study hour or even during a classroom session. They were being interrupted, and they're not going to be receptive and attentive. But if you would drive this robotic ball into the classroom, the kids all lit up and were like, what is that? What is this about? And then the librarian can make the sales pitch about how great the library is. We also did design challenges, or other libraries did design challenges with 3D printers and robotics. So I was speaking to one librarian who put together a makerspace, and what they did was they did a whole series of challenges. So first you had to build a 3D printed car, and then you had to put the motors and the robotic kits inside the car to make it move, and then at the end of it you had to race it on a track that you built. So you're building across all sorts of the STEM pillars, if you will. And lastly, the good segue is littleBits. I was at a conference once, and I was setting up the littleBits outside of the conference hall. And these 2 little kids came up with their parents, and they asked, oh, what are those? And I said, oh, they're littleBits. You can make circuits and things like that. So the 2 little girls started playing with the circuits together. And then all of a sudden, they were sharing and having conversations and talking to each other. And the younger girl couldn't figure out why her circuit wasn't working. And her older sister then stopped what she was doing and showed her how to make the circuit complete. She was missing a switch, so it wouldn't, or was missing the battery. So that's why it wasn't turning on. And so then their parents stopped me and they said, "Hey, our kids never got along like this ever. They're always fighting over the same toys. They never want to work together. You know, what is this? And why are you here?" And so I was like, "Well, I'm here for the library conference, and these are some of the tools that I show libraries and try to get libraries involved with." And they were so floored by that, they're like, "I'm going to email our library people right now and see if we can get littleBits in, so then that way my kids can go to the library again because we haven't been there in years." And I was like, "Wow, that's really kind of cool because this is the thing that I try to make happen." So that's essentially, and that's a good segue into littleBits. Is there any questions or anything like that?
Brian,
that was excellent.
Oh, sure, Kylie, go ahead.
Yeah, Magia.
Yeah. So, Brian, I just want to thank you for that presentation, and also thank you for reinforcing some of the design elements that we've been thinking about in our American spaces. There's been a real push to modernize these spaces, make them more interactive, make them more attractive to younger audiences, move away from the sort of passive collection of books and make them very active spaces. And maker spaces are a big component of that. And we've been working with a very talented team from the Smithsonian Institution they've gone out and visited some of our American spaces and made recommendations, and a lot of the recommendations that they made are reinforced by what you said. So the flexibility of the furniture, being able to move things around, having this rotating collection and sort of gaming areas to invite people to try their hand at new aspects of the collection in the library. So I want to thank you for that, because it did all really good concepts and great takeaways for us.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Or?
Well, Brian, when we talked before, you had talked about how, small moves that don't cost any money, but such as like removing the chair, for example, to get more librarians to be standing and circulating. Just kind of thinking about small tweaks of either removing or adding some things in. Playing with the furniture. Even if you're trying to do this on a zero budget, there's a lot of things you could do to kind of different interactions.
Yep, I would add to that then. So like if you had a little bit of a budget, you can paint, and just painting alone really makes a big improvement. Using bright, fun colors, it's cost effective, and it just makes rooms look bigger and more inviting. The other thing for people that are, so where I was from is a very art fluent community, so people all like making art and doing music. So what we did was we invited the patrons to make the art for the library. So it costed us no money to do art. Another one of my colleagues in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he does the same thing, but they're making his people make sculptures and statues, and so they have like a miniature art gallery in their library space that costed just materials to make.
That's a wonderful idea. Yeah, I love that. So, Allison, can you tell us a little bit more about littleBits and kind of especially how people are using them in library spaces?
Sure. Just a sec. Share the screen. Okay, so a little bit more background. We like to think of littleBits as an electronic language. Humans use language, whether it's verbal or written, and now technological language. It helps us understand, break down, communicate, and then reinvent our world. It also helps us to propel it forward, and that's kind of what we like to think about, how people use littleBits. You mentioned earlier you have students, children that are using littleBits to solve problems that they experience in their day-to-day life, and also come up with new devices, invent new devices to kind of enhance the world around them. So our CEO and founder, Aya, she's out of the MIT Media Lab. She's an artist, she's an engineer, and she kind of came up with the idea of littleBits because she wanted to take the ability to work with electronics out of the hands of the experts, out of the hands of the engineers, and make it really easy and powerful for every person to be an inventor, to be, to prototype, to learn, and to better understand. littleBits as the building block for electronics. So similar to when we started using building blocks for architecture, and that scaled up to these really beautiful, amazing, massive projects, littleBits allows you to take those electronic building blocks, build them into larger projects, and really empower yourself. Currently, we spend about 11 hours a day with technology, give or take. And for most, the technology underneath the surface is hidden, and unnecessarily so. So littleBits helps to kind of expose those inner workings and help us better understand those devices that we use. So they're color-coded and magnetic. The blue is power, so you always need a power to make your electronic device work. And the greens are outputs. Those are the ones that do something. They're your lights, your sounds, your motors. So the most simple circuit you can create is a power and an output. Snap them together and they do something. Then you can add different elements of control by adding sensors or switches, which are the inputs. Those are the pink ones. This one down here is a temperature sensor. Picks up the ambient temperature in the room. There's also motion triggers, light triggers, buttons. Basically the idea is any interaction you can have with an electronic device, you should be able to recreate with some combination of littleBits. To get even more advanced, you can add the orange ones, which are the wires. That'll allow you to add programming or internet connectivity, or this one here is a proto module, which actually allows you to create your own modules and integrate those directly into the system if you wanted to. So as I mentioned, they're magnetic, so you can't really go wrong. The magnets won't let you. And you can really recreate all of these electronic interactions. So for example, a power and an LED will show you exactly how your light works. Add a couple of elements of control. For example, a slide switch, which is just an on and off switch, and a light sensor and an LED. And this will give you a night light that will brighten or dim based on the amount of ambient light in the room. Really easy way, you mentioned, Brian, that you had kids kind of talking and interacting and building together and iterating. Really a collaborative activity. I know anytime I do Maker Faire or any of those events, the kids are just so enthusiastic and they want to snap things together and they want to see what happens and they want to recombine and break apart. And it's really very powerful just to get kids talking about electronics and get them interested and engaged, and that's really the first step. Going back to inventing and solving problems, littleBits, the consumer electronics world that we live in basically says, here's what you need. littleBits takes that back and lets you say, what do I need and how can I make that? So this little girl and her father actually wanted to make a chicken feed monitor so that they didn't have to go out and check the level of chicken feed in their bucket every day. So they attached a slide dimmer to a cloud bit and a threshold module, and as the threshold got lower and lower, they actually received a text message that said, you need to refill the chicken feed. And then if you wanted to get a little bit more complex, this is one of our engineers, and we actually built a robotic arm that lets you kind of control with a couple of different slide dimmers and really get a little bit more complicated depending on your desire or your ideas. So in regards to libraries and littleBits, we really encourage setting up a makerspace or a tinkering area. That really allows people to come in and kind of experience on their own terms and explore the interactions without maybe the pressure of a workshop or something like that. We've had libraries that check out kits just like they check out a book. So if a kid wanted to, they came in, they used it in their makerspace, and they really were excited about it, they'd be able to check that out and take it home without necessarily having to get their own kit. We've also had a number of libraries do workshops for families utilizing design challenges. One of my favorites was an elementary school that had a design challenge where the students were encouraged to make something that they had seen at a state fair. And the creativity that came out of that, we had bumper cars, we had Ferris wheels. It was really amazing. So really kind of leaving those challenges open-ended so that people are really encouraged to create and create in a way that's relatable to them. Another way to integrate those outside materials is to set up maker boxes with modules, with craft materials, maybe include some sample projects, and you can integrate these with Lego if you have a lot of kids that are into Lego, or even if you're trying to work on a budget, you can do recyclable materials and just encourage your patrons to bring those in, and that's a really great way to build that community and also encourage people to recycle, to reuse. So we have a number of case studies on our site for school library makerspaces, public libraries, and public library makerspaces. So in terms of school library makerspaces, we have Laura Fleming, who works with grades 9 through 12 on special physics projects, where she actually worked with the school's physics instructor to derive Kirchhoff's laws for series and parallel circuits, which is can be a very abstract concept that's a little hard for students to understand. But by bringing in little bits in a physical material, you can actually better understand an abstract concept because you can see it in action. So the kids were encouraged to create and tinker, but also the learning took place when they had to actually apply that knowledge through an exit slip. In elementary school, it was a little bit more focused on making and exploration rather than necessarily an end goal. So we have these littleBits 101 task cards that just kind of say, using the modules that you have in front of you, how would you make an LED blink every 5 seconds? So really familiarizing your patrons or your students by having them do something instead of just explaining verbally. We also have an online library of projects and lesson inspiration. So the kids were encouraged to browse and see, is there a project that really speaks to their interests, and then expand upon that. The kids were allowed to bring their own materials, again, bringing the home into the library space, bring their Legos, their Connects, their favorite extra materials. We've had kids hack their stuffed animals and make them a little bit more interactive. So it really just unleashes that creativity. In the public library, we've had a Lisa Goldstein who actually did a workshop for her staff librarians before sending the kits to her branches. She sent them out to 8 different branches. And that really helped to encourage not only the patrons, but also encourage the librarians to better understand the system so that they were comfortable getting their hands dirty in with the patrons and helping to explain if they had any questions. They've also done a mini maker fair, which basically just encourages, it's an event that encourages people from the community to come in and really experience many different materials that they may not have access to in their home. And finally, we have the public library makerspace. Tinkering Tuesdays was a once-a-month after-school program for grades 4 and 5, and it was an hour of science-based exploration where the kids would come in and they may have a challenge, or they may just have kind of a free play, do-it-yourself sort of club. This public library actually has a tinkering cart, so if you're a bit short on space and you don't have an area for a dedicated makerspace, they actually took one of those like Plano tackle boxes, had all of their materials in there, and had it on a little cart that they could just wheel out or put away. So that was a really great way to enhance your space without taking up too much of it. And then we also have, if you are interested in kind of using littleBits in your space, we do offer benefits to educators. So we have a 15% off discount for educators on qualifying products, since we know that budget can be a little bit prohibitive sometimes. Also on our education page, which is littlebits.cc/education, we have additional case studies, educator spotlights, where we actually go out and interview educators that are using littleBits in their classroom settings or their maker spaces, and really kind of get into the real world and see how people are actually using them. Lesson inspiration and supplemental materials, the challenge cards are up there, all of our PDFs of our instructional booklets are up there, and there's really a thriving educator community both on our forums and on our lessons, really kind of encouraging each other and bouncing ideas off of each other. So I definitely encourage you to take a look around there if you're interested. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Allison. I wanted to mention, I'm so glad you said something about the task cards, the challenge cards. Because we've been able to use them. We printed them out, and they're great with groups of all ages. And it's a wonderful way to encourage exploration and just have people try to build circuits and in a safe environment where they can't break anything, they can't do anything wrong, they can work through the challenges. And usually we have different kits that we pass around, and so if they don't have the right component that they need to solve the challenge, they can talk to another group, and then that leads to other ideas being shared and more collaboration. So it creates a wonderful learning environment. We've had a lot of success with that. And I'm so glad that littleBits provides so many educational resources, lesson plans, ideas, really great materials on your website. I wanted to share a question from Fatima, who is at the American Corner in Oran, Algeria, and she wants to know more about digital storytelling and creating stories using littleBits. Are there activities that we can use to help characters from stories come to life using littleBits? Do you know of any examples?
We actually do have a specific project on the site, actually, that is digital storytelling. I believe it was from a ninth grade history teacher who they were studying famous figures from history, famous presidents and other historical figures, and they actually used littleBits to add additional elements to maybe a diorama or a story reenactment. So using maybe a servo motor or a DC motor to make those characters really come to life, or that setting really come to life. So that goes back to integrating those extra materials and using littleBits maybe instead of to learn electronics in particular, using it as more of an artistic medium, just like you would use cardboard or just like you would use paint. Really integrating those into the projects just to add an extra element besides the electronic device themselves.
Right. Yeah, the other possibility there too is to kind of get small figurines, like from Frozen or popular narratives, even just paper cutouts that then can be kind of integrated with the circuitry and with the play to kind of mediate and kind of encourage storytelling and kind of bridging from like those popular books and materials. It was similar to what Brian was saying, is that instead of having a sign about the Clifford books, but having a big stuffed animal of Clifford. Just as small, plastic figurines that the kids could play with. These could even be donated to the library or, kind of collected over time.
I'd also add with the storytelling piece, so here in the U.S., a lot of libraries do something called story time, or story hour rather, essentially to where the kids come in, it'll be during the day, so it's more like elementary, preschool kids that have half days or something like that. So part of the day it'll be building crafts and materials, so it's like popsicle sticks and paper. But that craft relates to the story that they're going to read at the end of the day. And so there's a really good triage opportunity with littleBits where you can, instead of doing just the craft materials, you can also embed the littleBit pieces as well. And kind of like what Kylie was saying, merging those two things together and kind of making it more of an interactive craft time experience.
Right, exactly. Brian, do you have any suggestions? I think you have a bunch of strategies about kind of how to make things happen on a limited budget, or how to leverage different technologies in the space. Do you have any suggestions for people?
Yeah, so I always preach that you are better off to sell the seller. So when I looked for vendors and things like that, I would actually pitch to them. When I worked at the library, the pitch was, I have a population of 20,000 people. I was wondering if I can get your product for either free or at a discount. There's not that many companies that actually do discounts just for libraries. So props a little bit for kind of doing that early on. But otherwise, you're kind of stuck with the pitch of, hey, I have 20,000 people. in my library. How much does it cost you to market to 20,000 people? And they might not know, but they could give a ballpark, or they'll call their marketing person and, hey, how much does it cost to market to that many people? They're going to give you a number. Then you say, awesome. So what I would like to know is if it would be possible to get that in terms of a donation of your product or a discount of your product. And a lot of the times, the marketing person will be like, oh, well, yeah, sure, because that's cheaper for us. And then you kind of can do this little whole like triage type of thing where you work together with the company versus as a client vendor. It's more of a partnership. And libraries partnering with these companies, you can really make some really cool things happen. So we worked with one company called Siftio Cubes, who gave us a few of their sets just for free and some T-shirts to hand out when we had our grand opening. So we basically sold them what we were working on and what we were doing, and got the vendor involved into our process. And then they were very, very happy to help and provide things at a discount or for free.
Wow, that's a great strategy. I think we all should take notes on that. That's fabulous.
Thanks.
Allison, in terms of sort of managing this, how many kits does a library need to purchase? How many, how big of a workshop would you suggest for people getting started? What are some strategies for like kind of getting started tomorrow?
It really just depends on how many people you anticipate having in the space at one time. We have a variety of different size kits designed specifically for educational and makerspace settings. So if you were looking to do something more of a small inventor's cart, there's a student set, which is 26 pieces. It works really well for a group of 4 to 8 people. And that is assuming that they'd be working in pairs or collaborating together. If you wanted to do something more along the lines of a workshop where you wanted to have every set or every pair of people working with the same set of modules, there's a workshop set which is 100 pieces that works really well for a group of up to 10 to 20, and that allows you to use those challenge cards really well because everybody has the same set and they can kind of help each other in that way. Then there's also the larger sets, the one of everything in the Pro Library, which are a totally comprehensive view of the littleBits library. They're at least one of every type of module, so that's really for your inventors that are maybe a little bit more ambitious with they want to learn prototyping or they want to learn coding or something like that. So it really just depends, and of course we're definitely happy if you have any questions. Please don't hesitate to contact us at education@littlebits.cc. We've got a really great support squad that is totally willing to give advice.
That's great. Is there any considerations, for our international audience in terms of purchasing or in contacting you, or any hints that you might have for them?
We work with educators all over the globe. Unfortunately, we're working on international materials. All of our products are in English at the moment, but I mentioned that we have a really thriving educator community on our forums, and I really would encourage you to reach out over there if you had specific questions. There are many people that they post their questions there, or you can also join one of our chapter programs where you can actually connect with other littleBits makers in your community and go to a meet and make, or kind of get involved that way.
Fabulous, fabulous. So, I'm just asking all of you, what are some other ways that you could imagine integrating littleBits into the space? Should it just be on a counter, just kind of open for people to be playing with? Is it for special workshops? What are some of the other kind of creative ideas of things you might think about?
I love the idea of bringing people in by using or by showing rather than telling or kind of just leaving it somewhere. We've had a number of educators actually encourage people to make by making a project live, or having a little remote control car that they can drive around that they've made themselves. So something that really encourages conversation, encourages those questions, and is also a little bit more eye-catching.
I would piggyback with that and agree. It's easier to show and tell versus just to kind of just have it on a display, because people might not know what it is and they might walk past it. But if they see other people playing, they're more inclined to join. And I kind of want to bring up one of the fears that I've heard in the past, and kind of the rebuttal for it. I always hear people say, "Oh, it's so small and tiny, people can easily pocket it and leave." And so I set up an experiment. I had a set with little tiny LCD cubes about this big, very easy to pocket, and they were rechargeable through a dock. And so these libraries were afraid of it being stolen. Like someone's going to steal it. And first of all, not doing something in fear of being stolen is a terrible excuse. But so I was like, you know what, let's have fun with this. And so what we did was we put the cubes with the little LCD screens out on a table outside of the charging dock, right in front of the door of the library, and then we took down the camera. And then we said, all right, now let's see if anyone wants to steal it, because now they can get away with it, and they know they can get away with it. Let's put the perfect environment for them. Instead of being stolen, the kids put them back in the charging bays after they were done playing. So the rebuttal would be it's a bad fear to have, and if you're afraid of it, and that's going to be the reason why you're not going to do it, I think there's greater problems that you might want to think about. Not doing something out of fear of being stolen isn't a very good one. And conversely, if some libraries, if you were to take your budget about all the things that are missing and stolen, and this will be the amount that was just not returned, and then this will be the amount that was stolen. So overall, the amount of theft at a library is actually more of just people don't remember to return things.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think that's a concern for all of us. I think even if you do put things in cabinets, really thinking about not putting it in a locked cabinet in a box in the back, but really kind of thinking about putting things in visible, kind of clear containers so that you can see and access the stuff. We're starting to notice, I'm here at a conference here in Chicago, the American Educational Research Association, and I've been listening to a lot of the research that's been happening in maker spaces. So a couple of the key factors that we're starting to see is that visibility. Actually, it means that people know what to do, what's available, and where to go to get things. This could be staff as well as patrons, and so it's really important that we make visible all of this kind of stuff. The other thing that you've gestured a lot at, Brian, today was about having a dedicated space for this making. So I think the same kind of problem is if you're always, if the patrons are always waiting for somebody to come out with the stuff for a special event, when do they have open access to this kind of thing? And so I think as you think about those two general design principles of having access, having visibility, not putting it away in sort of a locked container, or only having an hour a day, which is making day. We've started in terms of institutional kind of work. You need the librarians, and you need the parents, you need everybody to kind of have this maker mindset. So we've started thinking about having kind of a maker day once a week, once a month, whatever it is. But it's a way for staff and learners to kind of come together and start to make something. So even if it's something small like that, kind of creating routines and organizational structures where everybody's engaging together can be a really useful way to build the culture. Magia, any hints about kind of what you're doing in your spaces? I know you guys have really come a long way in a very short period of time.
Yeah, so we're actually gearing up for our first library maker night this Friday. We've got an expert on robotics coming into town. He's the director of the RoboRave International program, which takes place, and it started in New Mexico, but it's really expanding worldwide. And so we've invited some local schools to come in and participate in that. And then our library, our host library, is open from 6 p.m. to midnight on Friday. And we've invited a number of partners to come in. We've got a Fab Lab here in Moscow. They're going to set up a demo. Autodesk, the Russian, so this is the American company that provides all the great 3D modeling software like Tinkercad and AutoCAD. They've got an office here in Russia, and their representatives are going to come in and do some 3D modeling demos. And the staff at the American Center are planning a whole suite of interactive activities having to do with science, hands-on experiments, cooking, coding, retro video games. This is our first really big event. We've had some small programs and activities. But we're really excited about this event, and it's a way for us to introduce our new space, which we're lucky enough to have a dedicated space where we have our 3D printers here. We have a number of tools and materials that people can come in, and they're welcome to come in at any time and tinker with. And then we also supplement that with lectures and hands-on activities.
Right. Build all these things piece by piece.
Mm-hmm.
Allison, in addition to littleBits, what are the other stuff that your typical littleBits creators have on hand? Like popsicle sticks and foam board. What is it that you should start stocking?
I would really encourage any recyclable materials, cardboard, toilet paper and paper towel tubes, tissue boxes, things like that. But also, we in the office, we use feathers, we use popsicle sticks, we use sequins, we use food sometimes. So it's really whatever kind of piques your interest, I think, and piques the interest of your patrons. But definitely those crafting basics, your cardboard, your popsicle sticks, your colored paper, and things like that.
Wonderful.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate everyone who joined us today. We didn't have that many viewers, unfortunately, but next time we'll make the recording available on our Moscow IRC YouTube channel. So those of you who couldn't join us today will be able to watch it at a later time. And I want to really thank Kylie and Allison and Brian for providing us with some great ideas for how to make our American spaces more interactive and how to use littleBits to make our encourage learning and make our activities more fun. Do you guys have any parting words to share with us at this point? No? Okay.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to mention that we have another webinar coming up on April 29th, and Kylie's going to be joining us for that again, as well as Cody Colfer from the Smithsonian Art Lab and Ingrid Dahl from Bay Area Video Coalition. And this, the focus of this next webinar will be on maker portfolios and helping students and makers compile creative portfolios that they can use to showcase their projects, and more colleges and universities are asking for maker portfolios. So this will be a great webinar, again, coming up on April 29th. And I'll also share a survey to try to get your feedback for all of our viewers. And thank you again. It was great talking to all of you today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.